Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. Delighted to have with me my former senator from when I lived in the great Commonwealth of Virginia, Mark Warner. Welcome, Senator.
Hey, Jen, thanks for having me.
So we had the move, I don't know if you call it a resignation or a firing or a transfer of Mike Waltz from the National Security Advisor to nominee for the United Nations, obviously following in the wake of the Signalgate scandal. He's going to have to come up for nomination hearings on his new post at the UN. What do you want to learn from him, and what have we still yet to find out about the Signalgate scandal?
Well, Jen, I will give Walt credit that he at least acknowledged there'd been a mistake. That was maybe the only person on the call that acknowledged the mistake. And as I kind of tend to agree with my friend Mark Kelly when he said, well, maybe they fired the wrong guy, because Pete Hegseth was, I think, a much more egregious effort where he put, his family members and, literally folks in harm's way. But on Waltz, I think it's going to be brutal. People rightfully want to know, number one, how many of these other, signal chats were you on? There's been an indication there were 20 of them. What were they? Did they discuss national security as well? The irony is, that I saw the story the other day where there was a picture of him using Signal on his phone. And there's using Signal as an encrypted application is actually better than using, normal cell phone texting, unless you're, Apple to Apple, all encrypted. But he also had this add-on app that records everything for presidential records requirement, and that has been hacked. And so, the whole notion here of, why didn't somebody say, hey, this is not a secure channel. We got to do better. We should not be discussing, the battle plans while jets were in the air. And I remember when it first broke, I said I'd invite Waltz, I'd invite Hegseth down to Norfolk, Virginia, where the Truman's, the aircraft carrier that had been deployed, that the planes took off from, because I had a town hall down there. The friends and family of the folks who were on the Truman, they are pissed off, and they had a right to be pissed off, because they know if that information had gotten out, their loved ones could have been killed. So how Waltz gets through explaining how many more of these, Signal group conversations he had. I'm not on the committee that will interview him, but I think it's going to be pretty darn brutal.
Right. In addition to the Signal chat, which, as you point out, Hegseth abused much more than Waltz even did, we have reports of utter chaos at the Pentagon, people being fired, close aides saying there's a problem here. How concerned are you about the operation of the Pentagon and whether there is a defined, informed, rational line of decision-making going on over there?
Just the presumption that there's any kind of rational, defined, informed process of decision making. Am I concerned? Heck yes. I mean, it's like my head's exploding. You've got, this weird rule where this wife doesn't have a full paid job, but she's brought into all these meetings. He's got his brother on the payroll, his lawyer on the payroll. What it does to people's morale. There's probably not, I'm not going to say every day, but 2 or 3 times a week, I'll get current or formers either directly to me or to somebody on my staff saying, oh my God, this is chaos. It's just chaotic beyond belief. Are we ever going to get relief? God willing, we won't have any kind of major incident, because this crowd not only couldn't shoot straight, but couldn't organize, a 2-car funeral. And that's, the Pentagon's pretty damn good at having chains of command and frankly, even being able to capture secretaries but they're saying they've never seen anything like this in terms of the kind of ineptness going on.
Now, you served on that very committee with Marco Rubio, who was chairman for a time, and obviously you have current Republican colleagues. What do they say? Are they not concerned that they have confirmed someone, and a lot of people, frankly, who are abjectly unfit and perhaps a danger to the country?
Well, it's interesting, Jen. I've had a couple of folks, my Republican friends, said, you know, I knew I was right on Hexef. You got to give me at least credit for that one. I say to those same people, I wish you would have felt the same way about Tulsi Gabbard, because my service, Marco and I were on the Intelligence Committee, so a lot of the Pentagon stuff is more the Armed Services Committee. But
Yeah.
in Tulsi Gabbard, you have someone who not only is, I think, way beyond her skill level, someone also who has remarkably had, anti-Ukraine and pro-Russian comments that will long precede her time as director of national intelligence. But with she does two things that just makes me wild. And there's almost not a day that goes by that she doesn't denigrate the workforce and call them deep state or this or that or the other. And it's just like you talk about driving morale down. And then because there is real concern from our allies, both from about DOD and about the director of national intelligence. Hey, can we trust these guys to keep it secret? And the thing is, if our allies stop sharing information, we won't really know that until there's an event. I know there was huge concerns. This has all been in the public domain, that the Israelis in particular were concerned about the first Signalgate chat about the bombing of the Houthis, because they had contributed some of the information. And the fact that it's been so careless, America will be weaker and less safe if countries like Israel and the UK and even some of our partners on the Baltic states and Poland and others stop sharing information with us. We got the best intelligence in the world, bar none, but literally in terms of total product, about half of it comes from allies, depending on the subject matter, all across the world. And they are nervous at this point in a way that nobody would have predicted, 110 days ago.
So these Republicans seem so wary of Donald Trump, so cowering. What would it take to get them to really cross-examine some of these nominees, have real insightful hearings, or is that just an impossibility in the current atmosphere?
Jen, I think that's a question of the day. I mean, I in this job, I've loved being on the Intelligence Committee more than any other part of the job, because it's not partisan. It really allows me to kind of dig in on these technology issues, particularly competition with China. And I know the men and women I work with, they care desperately about our national security too, but their unwillingness to speak up to date. Now, I don't kind of keep the faith of, as somebody who's even trying to do this one more time, it's like, I gotta believe, commitment to country will ultimately win out. But I hope it's going to be sooner than later. I do think, Trump is going to implode at some point, the kind of, whether it's the corruption in plain sight or whether it's these policies that are raising prices. But how much damage will be done that even if he reverses policies can't be undone? Things like my mom's family was from Canada, and I'm close to some of the folks in the Canadian government. And they said to me, Mark, we're never going to view you guys the same way. Canada, I mean, how can we? It's got to be pretty hard to piss off Canada. And we've managed to do that in 105 days in a way that says, I got some bourbon makers in Virginia that used to ship bourbon to Canada. They say it's going to be a cold day in hell before Canadians start drinking American booze again.
Right. Or a cold day in Newfoundland, I guess.
I'm going to try to make some other reference, but yeah.
Right. Marco Rubio was confirmed 99 to nothing. And in talking to many senators, they thought, this is the best we're ever going to get. He at least knows what he's talking about. He has, a sound understanding of the world. But whether it's Ukraine or human rights or USAID, he seems to be willing to jettison everything he knew, everything he believed in. Are you disappointed in him?
Listen, I work closely with Marco. Um, there's on all those issues you just talked about, we had a really good working relationship. Um, you know, I'm going to say there have been clearly times when I've been surprised, but I also know in this there is this kind of sense, I think, that people who are serving this president that oftentimes say, well, it will be so much worse if somebody else comes in. I'm not accepting that as an excuse by any means, and I get plenty of grief from active Democrats that are still mad at me for having been friends with Marco. I hope you'll find more of his voice. I also think he's kind of been put in an impossible position. I don't know how you can be Secretary of State, head of USAID, chief archivist, which by the way is like, God, which short straw did he get for that? And then all of a sudden, national security advisor. So I hope that that will get unwound a little bit. I frankly think he wouldn't mind that being unwound a little bit, but it does, it still begs something that I believe in. It's just the way the system works. I think we need to be critical of policymakers when we disagree with, and I am so frustrated with so many Republican friends. But I'm not going to be one of these guys that say, okay, I'm going to refuse to try to do business with any of them, because that's just not the way the system works. And we don't have to change everybody's mind. All we have to pick up is 4 or 5 people in the Senate to vote their conscience, or 4 or 5 in the House. And I have to tell you, I don't think we can always rely on Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski to lead every charge. So there's a bunch of my Republican friends who I'm like, spending a lot of time with saying, let's see where we can pick the first time to show a break, because once there's one break, the second time comes easier. And
Exactly.
I go back if you go back to and this is one of the things that never got fully reported. I don't think, maybe self-servingly, that virtually everything that happened under President Biden, that was the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS bill, the Electoral Count Act, most of the IRA bill, they didn't go up through the normal kind of committee process. It started because there were like 8 or 10 of us, bipartisan, that got together, and Mitt Romney and I always used to buy dinner and say, okay, can we get to a deal point, and then we would build out from that bipartisan consensus. And I think that's the kind of circumstance we're looking at again. And I'm going to at least keep swinging, because the consequences of saying, well, we're just going to punt on everything until after the 26 elections, that doesn't make much sense to me.
So the Republicans are still trying to figure out their budget. And it's really amazing to me that Republicans, who, as some people joke, were put on this earth to cut taxes, can't even figure out how to do that. But the president, in an interview on Sunday, made this curious statement that he is not going to cut Medicaid, Social Security, or Medicare. How in the world are Republicans supposed to pass this budget, which, granted, is really unconscionable on many levels? But if they don't touch any of those, how are they going to come up with a budget that Trump agrees to, that is not going to do incredible damage to their own constituents? How does this work out?
Well, if you're talking about math, it doesn't work. And this is even before the fact. Remember, some of my Republican friends, we can show how old I am. There was an effort back in the early part of the Obama administration called the Simpson-Bowles Agreement, where we were
Yes.
trying when the debt was going to be, oh my God, it's going to be 17 trillion. Now we're at like 36 to 37 trillion. And some of my Republican friends were like saying, well, one of the things we can't do is, we need to be honest with people and not cheat on what's called the baseline.
Yeah.
This gets really nerdy, but the bottom line is the Republican current plan is to say, using what's called current policy baseline, so that the $4 trillion plus cost of the first Trump tax cuts in 2017 don't count at all, which is like, gosh, if you were an accountant, you'd go to jail for that kind of accounting. And now the ability that you're going to add on some of these additional tax cuts on, no tax on tips or whatever else Mr. Trump dreams up one day or another, you can't do it and not cut Medicaid. It's just mathematically impossible. And the remarkable thing, Jen, here is that who's going to get really stuck with this? It's rural communities. In my state of Virginia,
Yeah.
virtually every hospital west of Roanoke will close down if there are Medicaid cuts. They're all operating on such a thin margin already, but you suddenly come in with these cuts and you're going to have people, you're going to have we've already got plenty of healthcare problems. You would have a full-blown healthcare crisis. People would not get services. For example, there wouldn't, a couple of the hospitals have said there would not be a hospital between Roanoke and Bristol that would be able to deliver a baby. So in America in 2025, are we really going to allow that to happen? And that's where I think a lot of my Republican friends are saying, no, that's a bridge too far. But it's one thing to say it. It's
Yes.
one thing to say quietly to you or me, gosh, this is awful. But until they're willing to say, no, I'm not going to vote for it, we're up the creek.
Exactly. And I think that's the most important takeaway, whether it's Trump, whether it's the Republicans, eventually they got to do their job. They got to deliver. So we'll be curious to watch them. Thank you so much, Senator, not only for being with us, but also for carrying some common sense into that committee. We don't envy you, and we'll look forward to having you back soon.
Jen, thanks so much. And keep being contrarian. We need contrarians.